All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Customer Service Champions video. I'm your customer service trainer, coach, and speaker. And today, this is going to be a jam-packed value customer service with the best of the best here. We've got our guest, Jeff Toister, and Steve is with me as well. So, Jeff, welcome to our show.
Well, thanks, Tal, and thanks, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate you having me.
Great. And Steve, tell us where you're coming in from today, and hopefully no more snow shuffling or any of that by this point, please.
No, instead of snow, I get the rain from sunny New Jersey, even though it's not sunny today.
All right. Well, we're really excited to have Jeff on our video podcast here because Jeff is one of the top leaders, one of the speakers and trainers out there who is really have taken the customer service world and continuously to add value in many venues. You should connect with him definitely in social media and the other aspects. I'm going to be talking about some of the books that he's got out there, but we're inspired because there's always great elevation when we bring in our guests, and Jeff has been someone that I personally actually read his first book. It was about the service failure, the real reasons employees struggle with customer service, because I was having challenges with customer service. So I thought, I got to dive into this, see what I can do differently, see what our team can learn. And one of the things you're going to be learning about, Jeff, is all about that team spirit and how to take your team to the next level. So if you're a manager, especially in the hospitality business, and a leader in your organization, Jeff is the right person to listen to and take some notes. Of course, I'm going to be talking about today about his recent book, the Service Culture Handbook. It's a step-by-step guide to getting your employees obsessed. And I love the word obsessed. If you want to achieve anything in your life, you want to be obsessed. He's laughing, but it's true. The book provides practical advice for companies that want to develop customer-focused culture. And Jeff is also doing amazing things. If you're not on LinkedIn, there's something wrong with you. I need to shake you or something. But if you're on LinkedIn, he is doing amazing courses over there. I've actually looked into one of his courses about customer service, so there's some great tips. It's also known as lynda.com. He's national recognized employee training expert, sought out after speaker with more than 20 years of customer experience leadership. And so, Jeff, I can talk about you all day, but I'm sure we've got some other things to do. But we're glad to have you here, sir.
Oh, well, thank you. That's quite an introduction. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited you read my first book, because that's going to be a scarce commodity soon. It's been out for over 5 years, and it's just out of print now. So we'll see what happens to it. It's probably going to get republished again sometime in the future. So I'm excited that you found Service Failure.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes it's so funny with book authors is that no one remembers their first book or something like that. I'm reading another author, and he was mentioning that he wrote this is the title of his first book, and I'm like, didn't even know there was a first book. What are you talking about? So, but truly, just a comment on that. If you're in the service industry, there are going to be some challenges, obviously, and all of us are looking for best practices. Or what I like about Jeff is that he shares real life stories, so it's not just something you get out of a textbook or something about real life scenarios. And that's one of the things we're going to be learning about the Service Culture Handbook, is that he was looking at companies, and not necessarily the top companies as you always hear about, but these are companies who are really making a difference with their culture, and he's going to be sharing with us more on that. So let's dive in. There's a lot of value into this show. Jeff, first of all, let's start with your definition of customer service. You've been in the customer service for a while. And what is a customer service culture? How would you define it? And then maybe share a few examples from the companies that you saw, and how does that resonate with them, if you could?
Sure. Well, let's start with culture, the big picture, because culture really is about behaviors. It's about thought process. It's how we understand kind of the world around us. So whether we're talking about customer service or employee engagement or safety or any other topic in the workplace, culture is how our employees and everybody that works there kind of view things and acts. So more specifically around customer focus, then a customer focused culture is a culture that truly values service and customers. And by this, we don't mean lip service like fancy sayings or posters or slogans. What we really mean is that employees go to work every single day, from the CEO on down to the front lines, and they're focused on providing outstanding service and outstanding customer experiences. So, a couple of examples would be, I know you guys are hospitality guys. So one hospitality example in the book is Shake Shack. And I have to ask, have either of you been to a Shake Shack before?
No, no.
Not myself, but I would love
Okay,
to learn
so
more about it. Yeah.
add this to your list. It started in New York City and got crazy, and now it's expanding across the country. They're bringing one to San Diego, which I'm excited about. But it's effectively like a burger place, right? And there's a million burger places. So what's special? Well, the first thing is when you go into a Shake Shack, it's the enthusiasm that's almost palpable and contagious. The employees are enthusiastic, and that rubs off on the other customers who seem to be enjoying the experience. The burgers, which is their core product, but they also do things like chicken and fries and things like that. Outstanding as you would expect, but the entire experience is just a little bit different, and it's almost tough to put your finger on it because it's still just a burger joint, but it's one where everybody there is focused on making that the best possible experience. And that's kind of the example, I think, of what a culture is like. It's not just a program or a saying. It's what does everybody that works there think like and act like? And so if you guys get a chance to go to Shake Shack, definitely check it out.
Oh, it's wonderful. I know we don't have that in Dallas, but I would love. My brother actually lives in San Diego, so I think that would be something for me. I mean, I know it's you mentioned in New York, but it was something that would definitely, if you guys going to have it in San Diego, would love to check that out and see what it's like. And you're right, it is house. It's kind of that DNA that everybody has that in their culture, and they're feeling and pumped up about it. So that's great. So.
Okay, Jeff, I have another question. You mentioned about hospitality. As you know, Tal and I, we spent the last 20 some odd years in the industry. When you look up hospitality in the dictionary, you see a picture of a hotel because that is the word that is usually associated with the hotel industry, and of course restaurants as well. But at some point, you all start off with a great hospitality background. You hire the right people. You go through all the training, the service culture, and you hire for personality and all the things that we speak about. But at some point, it's still a business. And at some point, you start focusing on your profits or your payroll. You start focusing on all the behind the scenes, the back of the house type of issues. And that may or may not affect the service that we're providing to our customers. So one thing, not only how do you prevent that from happening as far as you believe, but at the same time, how do you be able to create the culture that the customer service, the customer experience is always, in essence, job one. It is always has to be first, and everything else has to come second in order to build that true foundation that we hope for.
Well, I think to start, I don't know if I agree that it has to come first. I think that it has to come first in alignment with the business, and that's often the challenge that we have. In that we say, okay, I'd love to be customer focused, but we have some pressure on profitability, for example. And you're so right that in hospitality, as in many businesses, margins are a little thinner than people realize. Profit is something that's incredibly important. In hospitality, you often have multiple stakeholders involved. So the pressures are enormous. But going back to this perceived trade-off, I think that's a big mistake that businesses make, is they look at it as a trade-off between, am I going to be service-focused or am I going to be profit-focused? And what I found that the elite companies do is they realize it's doing both. Everybody in the organization understands that profits come from serving customers and guests, really, if we're talking about hospitality, in the right way. That I'm going to get more profits by having repeat guests, by having positive word of mouth, by spending less time, energy, and money trying to fix service failures because they don't happen in the first place, or if they do, we attend to them quickly. And I'll give you a really, really quick example. My wife and I were out to eat the other day, and we had a reservation. We were next in line, and a server came by and was trying to be helpful and seated somebody else that was behind us in line. So it's this little moment as a guest, you're like, that's an outrage and I'm upset, but in the scheme of things, it's not so bad. So the gentleman who was managing the The restaurant saw what happened, quickly came by. He apologized, and then he said, I'm going to take care of you. We'll make sure you're seated in just about 5 minutes. And we were. Now, what was interesting to me was that a couple minutes later, an appetizer appeared on our table. And so here is what you would say a really nice gesture. He's trying to turn things around, but I would say he wasn't focused on profit at that time. And in fact, I think the appetizer was a huge mistake. Why? Because how does he know that's the appetizer we wanted? In fact, it wasn't. We didn't want it, and we had some food allergy concerns. He had to send it back. So it was a small waste, but it was because I was going through the motions of service recovery versus realizing if he had just talked to us for a moment, he recognized that his acknowledgement and the apology was enough to make us feel fine. And then he could have asked us, perhaps, is there something else I can do? For example, I can give you an appetizer on the house if he really wanted to. But because he confused the two, I think he actually wasted money trying to be customer focused.
Sure, sure. No, I think it's a good example because sometimes, a lot of times people in our industry, they think that, well, by just comping it, by not charging somebody, that will fix the issue. No, your average person will be happy to pay for the product or service that they have asked for. They just want it when they want it and how they want it. And just not charging for some item is that top line mentality. Oh, well, it's just dollars and cents. No, it's how you feel. It's how you're made to feel. It's the appreciation shown to you. So yeah, and you're a perfect example. A 2-3 minute conversation would have been, for the most part, all that you have needed. Then maybe to give some little extra would have just been that icing on the top of the cake.
Oh, you bet. And so I'm going to tell you a quick hospitality story, kind of a dirty secret. I used to work in the parking business, and a lot of hotels, as you gentlemen probably know, maybe your audience doesn't, they contract out the valet parking to an outside company. And this was the company that I worked for. And often what would happen is if there was, at the hotels that we serviced, if there was any kind of service problem, the room service was late or the pool was dirty, they'd say, you know what, we're going to comp your parking. And why did they do this? Because they were guest focused? No, because the parking company was a separate budget and it didn't hurt the hotel's profitability in a way that the frontline associates understood. So yeah, the whole comping thing is not always as service focused as we'd like to think.
Correct.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think it requires some creativity and innovation. So it's not a cookie cutter approach. I used to work in a hotel where instead of parking, it was breakfast. Oh, okay. So almost every person you be like, we got to do something here. So it's not a custom made approach to all of it. Jeff, tell me about I talked to upcoming leaders in hospitality, emerging leaders, and they always want to know, they either walk into a disaster or they're just starting out building their team. How would one start to build a service culture in their organization? Especially, let's take the angle of hospitality.
Sure. So there's 3 things that you have to do, and it works in any organization, but I'll kind of structure this specifically for hospitality. The first is you have to define what outstanding service looks like. And I call this a customer service vision. It's something that everybody understands, and it's something that we're all trying to deliver. Probably the most famous hospitality example is the Ritz-Carlton, where the vision there is we are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. So that would be an example. You've got to have something like that. Not that exactly, unless you're at the Ritz-Carlton, right? But something like that that fits your organization and your brand, and everybody gets it. The second step is you need to engage all of your employees, from frontline associates all the way through leadership, to say, this is the compass that we're going to use to always point us in the right direction. Because you want people to understand in their daily interactions that if I'm serving a guest, I'm not just processing a transaction. I'm trying to achieve whatever this customer service vision says we're trying to achieve as an organization. And so that engagement part means that everybody gets it. The third thing is then you have to align yourself and your business around that. And hospitality, I think the greatest example is when you see an organization that offers outstanding service, you're probably going to see a general manager or other members of the management team. They're spending a lot of time front of the house. If it's a restaurant, they're talking to guests. If it's a hotel, then they're in the lobby. It's a banquet facility, they're talking to meeting organizers. And they're making sure that the guests are happy, they're spotting problems, they're coaching employees on the spot. In organizations that are not guest focused, that are not service focused, chances are those managers are in the back of the house pushing papers around. And that's one of the biggest differences I see in hospitality, that you can't lead from the back. You've got to be up front and understand what your organization is doing on a daily basis.
No, and I agree, and I could not share your sentiments even more. And I have to say, our general manager is upfront, and we have what we call kind of a lobby lizard, if you call it.
Yep.
And there's someone there in the morning, some there in the evening, in peak hours. But also, as a guest services manager, I'm the one that's leading by example. And I first of all love connecting with people. So for me, it's kind of the ideal job. If I had to pick a job, just engaging with people, connecting with people, it's always fun. But it's true, people follow what people do, not what they say. So when people are doing, if people can always preach or sending emails about, the standards and here's how we should do it and so forth, if you're not doing that as a leader, the less chances of that happening, I think, in many organizations. So that's a great point, Jeff. Thank you so much for that.
Oh, you bet. And to your point, that following by example, I don't know if either of you guys have seen it, but there's an amazing blog called I'm Your Server, Not Your Servant, written by Patrick McGuire, and it focuses on the restaurant scene in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of years ago, he put a post up, and I won't name the restaurant, but this restaurant was getting killed on Yelp. And the manager thought it was brilliant to write an email to all the employees, threatening them and literally threatening their jobs and saying, you guys are terrible, and if you don't turn things around, I'm going to fire people, and then posted that. And it's amazing because that email told you that this was a leadership issue. It wasn't the frontline associates. They were following that leader. And if that's how that leader treated associates, of course they're getting killed on Yelp.
Sure.
And so it's fascinating. I love those kind of stories. I'm giving a little plug to my friend there, but I'm your server, not your servant. Those behind the scenes stories are so incredible.
It's great, and I mean, resources are great. I mean, how we learn is by resources. So stories of success or failures sometimes illustrate what we can do better and how not to become a bad leader in the hospitality. So that's a good thing. Steve has been in the restaurant business for a long time, but Steve, go ahead with the next question here.
Jeff, you mentioned we speak about the Ritz-Carlton and, of course, all the other leaders in the industry. And if we can find a particular company or particular property, especially in the hotel industry, we use that term property, that has great service, we may want to copy that. But in your book, you mentioned that that's not really the best thing, to try to copy someone else's culture, someone else's idea. Why would that not be a good model to choose, or a good road to take when you know you have something that works and your business is profitable on that, and you have the clientele that keep coming in? Why is it not great to copy someone else's service culture?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because the Ritz-Carlton, some other iconic companies like Zappos, Disney, etc., actually sell seminars. You can pay good money and go learn about their culture. And I think what's often lost in that, is as successful as these organizations are, it's not a step-by-step formula that you can follow, and 6 months from now you can be just like them. I think what we often lose sight about is, take an organization like the Ritz-Carlton, for example. This is an organization, I mean, they're now part of a much larger Marriott family, but this organization has been in place for well over 100 years. So this wasn't something that the CEO went to a seminar and said, hey, we're going to be like whatever the great culture was at the time. This is something that evolved. And so I think that's the first mistake that companies make, because they don't realize the long-term commitment that these great organizations had to go through, that it's embedded in their DNA. The second, I think, problem is we're not all the Ritz-Carlton. If you are selling hamburgers, saying, you know what, we're going to be ladies and gentlemen, serving ladies and gentlemen hamburgers, it doesn't ring true. It's not authentic. It doesn't even make sense. There's something unique about your organization, and that's what your culture needs to capture. And so that's the third thing. If you want this culture to really stick, you need to make it about what your organization is. What's unique? What's special about it? And I often tell my clients, think about what your organization does for your customers on its best day, when it's really going well. And let's try to be more of that. And let's forget these other organizations. As great as they are, we can learn from their process, but they're unique, and so is your organization. So let's be your best unique self.
Oh, great. I think another thing, and one thing that I've discussed during my training sessions is that, as well as the the business is only as good as the customers that walk in the door. It has to be a partnership, and you may have your service culture, your vision, but it still has to be applicable. It still has to be a good marriage of the people that are walking in your door, that are paying your bills and paying your individual salary. At the same time, even if we want it to be the Ritz-Carlton, maybe our clientele, our base, the people who frequent our place of business are not looking for that type of a culture. So either we could try to match our clientele, or we can be an island all to ourselves and just say, well, we only want this type of a person or that type of a market share. So I think a great service culture can also, they will try to find a way to change their way of doing business to also match the expectations of their clientele, because service culture, the word culture is different from somebody from the Middle East, or somebody from an ex-Soviet bloc country, or somebody here from San Diego. Our expectations are different. So what is great service to me may not quite be the same as someone else. And I think if we want to be in this inclusive world, and I hate using a term like that, but we do have to find a way of being the best we can to everybody, to the best of our ability, within our mindset, within our core of who we need to be and who we want to be as well. And I think that's ultimately, once we forget that we're in partnership with the people that walk in our doors, I think we're just bound to fail at some point.
I think it's true. I mean, Jeff, you shared the example of that unique restaurant, obviously. So they didn't copy the standards and all this kind of stuff from other companies. They wanted to be their unique, and you share that experience because it was a story they created. But if they delivered the same story, the same values or service values and culture, you wouldn't walk away with something unique to share with someone else. And that's, I think, sometimes businesses get caught up, which is kind of my next question here, is that, they're coming up with these slogans, this year we're going to focus on service culture. This is what, all these mantras. And then I want to hear your feedback on this perspective on, there's a big gap between intention and execution. I mean, taking the action to really deliver that consistently is I mean, you hear that every day. Almost every company wants to have a service culture, but how do you measure that in terms of the execution part of that? I mean, you've looked at some of the in your book. Obviously, you have some examples. But I want you to share with us, what do the best really do? And of course, we're not talking about Ritz-Carlton and Amazon, but what are those companies that you looked at? Why are they so consistent? Why are they executing the service culture rather than coming up with a philosophy? They're coming up with action. Talk about that for a second.
Well, I think that's the key. It's a difference between a philosophy that maybe is shared by a few members of the executive team and long-term commitment and action. And the best example I can give you, there's a lake near my home that's got a really nice running and walking and bicycle path. One lane each direction, goes almost all the way around the lake. And it's a wonderful place to get outdoors and exercise. If you go there the first week in January, it is jammed. And I bet you can guess why it's so jammed, right? Everybody's got their shiny new running gear, walking gear. They made that New Year's resolution. This is the year that I'm going to focus on taking care of myself and get in shape. Well, come back at the end of the month and guess what? Back to normal. Why? Because it's easy to set the intention, New Year's Eve, make a resolution.
Yeah.
It's difficult to commit to it, especially, and going back to a question that Steve asked about, balancing profits versus service, especially when your first quarter P&L comes in and you're looking at your profitability and saying, I'm spending a lot of money on this service initiative. Maybe I need to pare back a little bit because I'm getting some cost pressure in other areas. And that commitment evaporates. So if you want to know, what's the biggest thing, what I look at these companies, the companies I profiled in the Service Culture Handbook, this wasn't a one-time deal. It wasn't a quick fix initiative. This was a long-term commitment. The other thing I can tell you from doing research on the companies that I profiled, they also didn't pick and choose. I sat down with an executive of a fairly large company, and I she had asked me about the book. And she said, all right, give me the Cliff Notes version. What's the one or two things I really need to do? And it's a typical executive inattention, right? It's I want to pick a couple things and just run with it and we'll call it a day. And I said to her, it's not going to work. I wouldn't recommend doing that. That would be like seeing a beautiful cake and getting the recipe for that cake, but saying, you know what, I'm only going to use half the ingredients and I'm only going to follow half the steps. You're not going to get that cake. You're going to get something else, and it's going to be terrible.
Right.
And when I looked at organizations that develop an amazing service culture, they didn't pick and choose. They followed a very clear plan. They did it over the long term, and they followed all of the steps. They used all of the ingredients. And that was something I consistently saw as the difference between those elite organizations and most organizations who are frankly just paying culture a little bit of lip service, but they don't mean it.
No, and if I can just kind of piggyback on what you're saying, I always give the analogy of sports. I mean, you start thinking about whatever your sport is, football, basketball, what you're finding out is that you don't have the coach or the owner of the team saying, hey, give me the cliff notes on how to win a championship. I mean, it is definitely a long haul consistency, execution, and a lot of other things too. And what I love about your book, and I recommend it, not necessarily just, to promote it, obviously it's a great book, but it's one of those things, as Jeff alluded to, is that if you want to be successful, no matter what you do in your life, you don't skip the steps. You can't be the next whatever you are if you're skipping a step. That's like saying, I'm going to skip a practice today and I'm going to win a championship. It doesn't work that way. So you do have to be fully committed, obsessed about it, and take the long haul rather than the shortcut. And I agree with you so much on that. So great point.
Sure. Jeff, I have one question for you. Since you're focusing on really trying to help other companies develop their service culture, in order to do that, do you need to have rock stars on your team? Do you need to have these 3, 4, 5, 15 fantastic ambassadors of customer service, or can it be done with a less stellar team? What do you think?
I don't like rock stars. And let me tell you why I don't like rock stars. Rock stars are high maintenance. They're selfish. They're a little bit unreliable. I would prefer to have a team of roadies in my organization, and I think you have a team of roadies, you can do amazing things. And so I love that characterization. But and I really call it a team of roadies. So roadies, it's amazing if you've ever watched roadies set up for a concert. Everyone knows their job. They function together as a team where they really support each other, and they're in it for the end result, which is an amazing concert, not their own individual glory. And so to go to your question, I found that if you put an average person in the right environment, they can shine. There will certainly be some people that we would call rock stars that are amazing in their performance, but most people will shine if you put them in the right environment and create the right culture. You can take those same people and put them in the wrong culture, and they're going to do some things that you don't want them to do. And in my research, I've talked to thousands and thousands of customer service professionals, and it's amazing. I've talked to a few people who are brave enough to admit to me, yeah, I've provided bad service on purpose. And the reason I did it is because everybody around me in my organization was providing bad service. And if I went the extra mile and tried to fix something, my boss would yell at me, no one would listen, and I would be ostracized by my coworkers. And it wasn't until I left the organization that I felt I could be my true self. And I've heard that story many times. So it really is that, going back to culture, you create the right environment, you get people that are in it for the team. I think you're going to get much better results than everybody kind of trying to get their own turn in the spotlight.
Sure. I think it's similar too when you're hiring somebody that doesn't have the same amount of years experience. You get somebody fresh out of school. If you've never been a waiter, as an example, or if you've never been a designer is not the best situation. Let's say a waiter. You don't have to break someone out of certain bad habits or teach them a new way of doing it, because in their mind, well, how I did it before was the only way of doing it. That's what works. Well, that may work at another property, but let me teach you another way. And when you realize that that way is at least just as good, possibly even better, their personality can come through. And you're not trying to break any bad habits. And somebody who's coming in, that's all that they know now, and they can really focus on the culture that you're really trying to provide. And you don't have someone similar to what you're saying, Jeff, where we'll intentionally try to sabotage it because they're going to say, well, this new way is not good. My old way was better. Well, maybe it really wasn't. And so that's really great. There's two different sides of the same coin where people can sabotage your great culture from one or two little things that are slightly off from what they're accustomed to. So that's good. Thank you.
Kind of want to go over just real quickly, before we finish up about engagement. I know everybody likes to, every decade there's a new word. 90s was empowerment. So one of those things, the reason I wanted you to talk about engagement, Jeff, was engagement obviously is very low, still in the 30% for many organizations. What I find challenging, just being in the industry, is that you hire the right people and you give them tools and training, and how do you kind of rekindle that engagement piece into a hospitality professional?
Well, you're so right. This has been a topic we've been talking about. I mean, engagement's definitely been a hot topic for well over 10 years now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm going to fire a question back at you, Tal, and you, Steve. And there's no right or wrong answer to this. I just want your perspective. What does employee engagement mean? Like, how do you basic definition? How would you define it?
Let Steve go first.
For me, what I believe is you have to have a certain core personality in you. I don't want people to come to work for me because they're just looking for a paycheck. I mentioned this on one other video that when I hire people, I want to see passion inside of them. Again, if your experience is not there, if you don't have certain skill set, I can understand that because that will come with time. But you cannot be engaged at what you're doing. You cannot anticipate the needs of your customers, of your guests coming in there, unless you really want to. And I think part of it is you have to have a servant mindset, a servant attitude as a start. With that will automatically lend you to be the type of a person who will find a way of making it happen and finding a way of working with your team and getting through those slightly difficult days as we spoke about. And I believe employees that have that mindset will automatically be that first smile that you see when you're coming in the morning. And at the end of the shift, when you've had a long day, the smile is still there. And you're going to get involved and you're going to create additional leaders, hopefully, as part of you. And so engagement to me is somebody that really wants to do it, not for the paycheck, not for the accolades, but because it makes them feel good. And that's pretty contagious.
I look at it from a leadership perspective, and I'm going to obviously say that everything rises and falls on leadership, and that is a John Maxwell approach. But I say leadership is responsible for creating the environment of engagement, and we're talking about culture, so you have to be a driving force. One of the things that I just want to share is that we're talking, as kind of in this conversation came about, was you're hiring someone to fulfill a function, or you're hiring somebody to fulfill a purpose. And where we want a service culture, we want to hire somebody for a purpose. What is the customer going to walk away with? So when you're hiring somebody for Disney or these companies, they're walking away with an experience. And so when I look at engagement, I look at what is the leader responsibility is in creating that environment so people will be engaged. I can't talk to someone every day and tell them you need to come in to work engaged. That's not how it works. I mean, I think you need to create the environment just like our top leadership is creating environment for us. If they're not creating that environment, then it's very difficult to go through, especially if you're working at the front desk. I mean, your job can be very routine, but at the same time, if again, it's leadership by example, you can make a front office very fun, a reception team very fun and exciting and jolly, and at the same time the other way. So Jeff, I think it's a lot of it is leadership.
So I don't disagree with either one of you, but think about your comments for a moment. They're both a little bit different, right? And so Tal, you'd asked, okay, well, why aren't we moving the needle on engagement? First reason, no one has a clear definition of engagement that we all agree on. In other words, Tal, your definition is fine. I like it. Steve, your definition is fine. I like it, but they're different. And if we were in the same organization working together, and we didn't take the time to define what is it that we're working on when we're talking about engagement, guess what? We're working on different stuff.
Right.
And
Good
so the
point.
first challenge is, and even the major consulting companies that do this engagement research, they don't have a consistent definition. They differ. You're talking about engagement results. Gallup just released their 2017, their latest engagement report. Nowhere in that report that I could find, and I've read it a couple of times, could I see, by the way, folks, this is what we mean by employee engagement. There's no clear definition. So let's start there. The definition I like to use combines both of what you're talking about. It's the extent to which an employee is deliberately contributing to organizational success. And so to do that, they need to know what organizational success looks like. So Tal, that's the leadership portion, and they need to be committed to doing it. Steve, that's the passion, right? So the second piece then is we do need to hire people who want to be engaged. That's that passion that Steve was talking about. Here's the challenge. When I was looking at all the things that customer-focused companies do, the biggest difficulty that even the high culture organizations had was hiring people for culture. And why is that? It's a couple of things. One, I don't know how to hire people for culture. A lot of, and I'm saying that rhetorically, I think I have a system for doing it, but the average hiring manager does not. When they say hire for culture, what they really mean, and they don't realize it, they mean I'm going to hire people that I like, that I'm going to get along with, that seem to fit. But that's not a systematic way of doing that, and that's certainly not scalable when you have multiple hiring managers making multiple hiring decisions, perhaps at multiple properties. So being able to scale hire for culture fit is something that many, many organizations struggle with. So let's say, though, we do hire, and we hire for passion, and we bring in people who want to be engaged. The average organization systematically crushes that engagement from day one. And I'll give you a quick hospitality example. So recently staying in a hotel, and the iron in my room was broken. And I had to call 3 times to get an iron. And I think you gentlemen probably get it, but for those folks who don't realize the process involved, I talked to one person on the phone who probably dispatched a message to somebody else who may or may not have been the person who was delivering my iron. And somewhere in there, the process was broken. But the person who was trying to be friendly, who answered the phone, who was not delivering my iron, had to listen to me. I was pretty patient, but by the 3rd phone call, I'm like, come on, what's it going to take? That poor person, it would be hard for that person to be engaged because they're taking the call. They're feeling the brunt of it, yet they aren't able to physically deliver the iron. That's someone else's role. Well, what about the person who probably was just informed 5 minutes before they finally delivered my iron? So someone else dropped the ball, or a system dropped the ball, or a process dropped the ball, and now they're face to face with me, the angry, upset guest. How gracious am I going to be, really? Now, I recognize this, so I try to be gracious, but the average guest would not. So that person's crushed because they were put in a position where they were going to fail. And if that happens once in a day, okay. But if it happens repeatedly, pretty tough to be engaged. So, I mean, I think you gentlemen kind of raised this issue. Why don't we get traction? It's so incredibly difficult.
But I think I agree with you, and that hotel needs to read Service Failures book. But I agree with you. I think you brought a good point by illustration. We don't have a clear definition, and not only us, but other organizations don't have really clear. You talk about vision, you talk about other things in the culture, alignment, those kind of things. But you're right. The point is, if there's no clear-cut understanding, clarification of what that is, then you can ask 10 people and they're going to give you like 10 different answers of what it's like. And so how do we get there if we don't know what it is? So that's a good point, Jeff, in doing that, and we'll probably dedicate another show to that. But because I think it's important, and I read the last one too, and then there's a lot of great things for leadership too as well. But it's just like anything else. How can you do something you're not really clear about? If there's only 2 people who are not clear about, imagine a group of people who is 100, 200, maybe 1,000 people working for an organization. They come up with their own, and so it's difficult. But Jeff, thank you so much. I think there was a show with a lot of jam-packed for people who are definitely want to kind of get the ball rolling. Remember, it's about action. Jeff had shared with us some of it here. Obviously, we can't go through each and every one, and that's why you should get the book. It's a great blueprint for success, and we tend to appreciate it because in the hospitality, I mean, service is, I mean, yesterday I went to a bagel shop and service was definitely not part of their anything. No one even acknowledged me. All they did was get the bagel, got it, and put it on my table, and that's it. It's like that's bad. So thank you, Jeff, for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and tell people where they can find you. That would be great.
Sure. Well, and thank you guys, both of you. I really appreciate it. And it's been a lot of fun for me. I'm pretty easy to find because I'm the only person I know named Jeff Toister, Toister. Probably an easy way if you want to learn more about the book, learn a little bit more about me, serviceculturebook.com. And there's many ways to connect with me from there.
Great. Steve, tell us where people can find you as well, and we'll conclude our show.
Well, the same thing. I think there's at least 2 or 3 that have the same name as me, Jeff. But stevedegioia.com, and my blog is stevedegioia.com/blog, and that's where I spend most of my time. And I'm looking forward to reading your book, Jeff. I haven't had an opportunity to do that, but based on what we spoke about today, it definitely gets the interest up. So once again, thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
All right, guys. This is a lot of added value. As you can go back, watch the replay, share with me your comments and feedback. But obviously, it's about doing the work, looking into some of this stuff, and then start learning from it. I'm learning from it. I've been in the business for a long time, but I'm learning from Jeff and Steve and anybody else I can learn from. So those are great tools for everybody. And we'll see you guys on our next video podcast. Have yourself a great day.
Great. Thank you.